My
Yeah.
patient, Mr. Ramesh, a 35-year-old Hindu farmer, educated till 8th standard, residing at Vashi, hailing from UP, came to NMMC on the 20th of September with chief complaints of pain in the left leg since 7 months and black discoloration of the left great toe since 2 days. My patient was apparently all right 7 months ago when he started to have a crampy pain in his left calf, which was insidious in onset and appeared when he walked approximately 1 kilometer and it got relieved on walking further. The pain appeared at a lesser distance when he walked uphill. Gradually, over the next 2 months, the patient could walk with a limp despite the pain. Since the last 3 months, the patient can walk for 500 meters with the pain relieving only when he stops walking for about 5 minutes. Since 1 week, there is a continuous severe aching pain over his left foot, which is increased in the supine position and is relieved by dangling the limb at the side of the bed. Since the last 2 days, the left great toe has gradually blackened with loss of pain and sensation over the toe. He has not received any treatment for his condition.
Okay. So from the chief complaints, what can you figure out what patient has?
So he has intermittent claudication due to the crampy pain, and it has now progressed to rest pain with gangrene.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So what is intermittent claudication?
So intermittent claudication is a type of pain in the muscle which is caused due to decreased vascular supply.
Hmm.
It is due
Okay.
to the anaerobic metabolism of the muscles.
Okay. Okay. And how will you grade intermittent claudication?
So it can be graded on the Boyd's classification.
Hmm.
Class 1 is when the patient can walk for a certain distance, but when he walks further, the pain is relieved. Class 2 is
Hmm.
when the patient can walk despite the pain. In class
Hmm.
3, the patient has to take rest, and in class 4, there is rest pain.
Okay. So now patient is in stage 4, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Fine. Now what is a claudication distance?
So it is the distance for which the patient can walk before the pain appears.
Okay. Can you add something to this,
Mm,
to this description? What else need to be added?
mm, I don't know, sir.
No, means what I am saying that what you mentioned is correct. Means it is the distance when first patient will perceive the pain in the calf muscles, for example. So say maybe like your patient now is having around 500 meters, fine, okay. So that is the claudication distance. But to gauge actually the what is it the exact distance, you need to eliminate certain other confounding factors such as anyone else can answer also. Yes, no one. Yes, sorry.
Thrombosis.
No, no, no. I'm not asking the underlying pathology. When you are mentioning a claudication distance, what all other additional points or prerequisites one need to understand to label it as actual claudication distance for that particular individual? Like you
Sir, it is
mentioned
measured on
in
a flat surface while with normal wind speed at normal walking speed.
hmm, okay. So basically, it is preferred that this distance is gauged or measured on a flat surface, not uphill or not downhill.
Yes.
Okay, one thing. Second thing is, so it basically eliminates the gravity factor for it. Second thing is, it patient shouldn't be walking against heavy wind. So with the wind or normally at a normal wind speed as such. So these two factors are also important when you are mentioning the claudication distance. So at a normal flat surface with the wind, okay, and at normal pace.
Okay.
most
Okay.
importantly. If he is walking briskly, then there is a possibility he will have pain at earlier distance. But if he is walking normally at leisure, then there is a possibility he may perceive pain at a later distance. So this is very important three factors: the pace with which he is walking, he or she. Second thing, the surface, which should be flat, not uneven, or not uphill or downhill. And third, with a normal wind speed, not with the wind nor against the wind. Okay, so these three factors are important when you mention a claudication distance, and then only you can say yes, this is actual claudication distance for my patient. Fine. Okay, proceed
Okay,
now.
Sir, I had a
History of
doubt.
Ah, yes,
Sir,
yes, yes. Ask.
isn't then claudication distance supposed to be subjective?
It is subjective only. What is the issue?
So,
It is
sir,
not
then is it
objective
reliable?
finding. See, remember the concept, claudication distance will be different, no? For example, for you it will be different, for me it will be different. It is not objective finding, correct? Claudication distance will vary from
From
person
the
to person. So,
but
for
from the
1% is
examiner's
1 kilometer. What?
from the examiner point of view,
See,
for me, for the
uh,
same person, it could be
uh,
different, and for you, it could be different.
no, no, no. See, once the parameters are set, like flat surface with normal wind speed at normal pace, okay, these are three fixed parameters, fine. And then you gauge for that particular X individual. Now there are suppose three individuals, X, Y, and Z. So each one will have different pathology. So each one will have different claudication distances as such. So it is not a generalized thing that 500 meters is a claudication distance. It will change from individual person. So a person will walk say a kilometer initially, like this person, this particular patient, what is describing. So initially it was much longer, and then it has shortened, and now it is much shorter. And even now at rest he is having or perceiving pain. So it is there. It is progressive as such. So it is a totally individualized entity. Please remember this. It is not a subject. It is not an objective entity as such. So don't worry about that. So you have to just mention it. It will vary, no, from person to person. Okay.
Okay, sir, thank you.
Yeah. Welcome. Please proceed now.
history of etiology. There is no history of
Yes.
trauma. There is no history of low-grade fever, calf pain, and redness, or a history of prolonged immobilization. There is no history
Mhm.
of giddiness, stroke, TIA, transient loss of vision, or other embolic phenomena. There is no
Mhm.
history of chest pain on exertion or pain in abdomen after meals. There is no
Okay.
history of cyclical color change in the fingers with tingling and
Mhm.
numbness on exposure to cold. There is no
Okay.
history of any medications for migraine headache. There is
Okay.
no history of sore on genitalia. There is no
Mhm.
history of sharp shooting pain radiating from the lower back to the limb. There is no history of pain being present on taking the first step. There is
Okay.
no history of pain, swelling, and redness along the course of superficial veins. There is a history of smoking, which I will describe in the personal history.
Okay. Now, nice. You have covered almost all the points. Now, just quickly mention what all pathologies you have ruled out here.
So, with low grade fever, calf pain, redness, and prolonged immobilization, I asked for DVT. Then giddiness,
Mhm.
stroke, TIA, and transient loss of vision is for embolism. Chest pain on
Okay.
exertion and pain in abdomen after meals is for angina. Cyclical color
Okay.
change with exposure to cold is for Raynaud's phenomenon. History of
Mhm.
any medications for migraine headache is for history of ergot alkaloid.
Mhm.
Sore on genitalia to rule out syphilis. History of
Mhm.
sharp shooting pain radiating from the lower back to the limb to rule out neurogenic pain,
Mhm.
and pain being present on the
Okay.
first step to rule out osteoarthritic pain. Uh, Pain,
Mhm.
swelling, and redness along the course of superficial vein for thrombophlebitis, which is often seen in Berger's disease.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So it is important when you mention in the exam, you should be always ready with such a list that immediately you can tell that this through this list I have ruled out so many possibilities or other pathologies. Very good. Then proceed. Next.
History of complications. There is no history of
Mhm.
foul smelling discharge or edema at the site. There is no history of severe pain in the thighs, buttocks, and hip with impotence. There is no history of similar lesions proximal to the primary site with intervening normal areas. There is a history of
Mm-hmm.
blackening of left great toe with loss of pain, sensation, and all the movements over the affected area.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. But is your patient have is in complications or not?
So he's having a dry gangrene.
Huh. Plus rest pain is also there, correct? So even at
Yes,
rest he is perceiving pain. So this is
yes,
sort of a slightly complicated case with a dry gangrene, obviously. Okay,
yes, sir.
fine. Then go on. Next.
Past history, there is no history of
Mm-hmm.
diabetes, TB, or asthma. There is no history of any surgeries. Personal history, sleep is disturbed since 1 week due to the leg pain. Appetite is
Mm-hmm.
normal. Bowel and bladder habits are normal. The patient is a
Mm-hmm.
smoker since 15 years and smokes about 20 cigarettes per day. The pack year
Mm-hmm.
index comes to 15 and the smoking index is 300. There is no history of alcohol addiction. Family
Okay.
history is
How
not
now? Tell
significant.
me how smoking affects this peripheral arterial disease. How it evolves.
So smoking, if it is an atherosclerotic disease, it is an independent risk factor as well as it will accelerate the process of atherosclerosis. It
Mm-hmm.
is very commonly associated with Berger's disease. So smoke will form the nicotine and carbon monoxide will
Mm-hmm.
form carboxy hemoglobin, which will cause vasospasm and obliteration of the vessel lumen. This
Okay.
will compromise the blood supply, causing the claudication pain. In
Mm-hmm.
Berger's disease, also nerves and veins will be involved. So
Okay.
this nerve involvement will cause the rest pain.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Fine. Then
So general examination.
yes, general examination.
Patient is conscious, cooperative, and well oriented. He is averagely built and moderately nourished. Height is
Mm-hmm.
165 centimeter, weight is 63
Mm-hmm.
kgs, BMI is
Mm-hmm.
23 kg per meter square. Temperature
Okay.
is afebrile. The pulse is 72 beats per minute in the right radial artery with regular rhythm, adequate volume, force, and tension, bilaterally symmetrical, no radio-radial and radio-femoral delay. The condition of
Okay.
the vessel wall appears normal.
Mm-hmm.
Peripheral pulses will be described in the local examination.
Mm-hmm.
The respiratory rate is 18 per minute and the BP is 130 by 80 mm of Hg. There is no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, edema, or lymphadenopathy.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Sir,
Would you
local
like to
exam.
mention the peripheral pulses?
Sir, I will mention it in the local examination.
Okay. No, no, no. Okay. No issue. No issue.
The
Then.
patient was local exam. The patient was
Mm-hmm.
examined with due consent with limbs well exposed in the supine and standing positions. On
Mm-hmm.
inspection, the opposite limb appears normal. The left great toe has a blackish discoloration with a dry, mummified, and shriveled appearance extending up
Okay.
to the proximal interphalangeal joint, where it
Mm-hmm.
forms a well defined line of erythema, proximal
Mm-hmm.
to which the leg appears normal.
Okay.
The skin of the leg is thin, shiny, and with scanty hair. There is loss of subcutaneous fat over the leg. Nails are brittle with transverse ridges. There is no
Mm-hmm.
pain, swelling, and redness over the superficial veins. There is
Mm-hmm.
no evidence of varicosities. There is no ulcer, discharge, sinuses, or edema. There are no skip lesions.
Okay.
Sir, on palpation,
Mm-hmm.
the skin
Anything
of
else
the
on
left toe.
inspection?
So the Burgess angle I will mention later.
Then
Sir, after auscultation.
you can mention now also because there is
Okay, sir.
all inspectory finding, right?
Okay, sir.
So
So the
inspectory
Burgess,
finding you can finish. Yeah. Tell.
so the
Tell.
Burgess angle is 30 degrees, and
Mm-hmm.
Fuchsic's test is positive.
Okay. How do you test Burgess angle? Tell please.
The patient is asked to lie in supine, and he
Mm-hmm.
has to raise his leg without bending at the knee joint. So in a
Mm-hmm.
normal person, despite raising the leg at 90 degrees, the leg will appear normal. But in an ischemic limb, at a lesser angle, the patient will experience pain. There will
Mm-hmm.
be pallor, and
Mm-hmm.
there will be guttering of the veins.
Okay.
So if the angle is less than 30 degrees, it
Mm-hmm.
indicates a decompensated ischemia.
Okay. So it is called as a critical limb ischemia. Okay. So you have to grade accordingly. Critical limb ischemia. Are you aware of this terminology? Critical limb ischemia.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So can you tell me something about it?
So it is defined as an ABPI of less than zero point 0.3,
Mm-hmm.
and it comprises of rest pain, gangrene, and
Mm-hmm.
ulceration.
Okay. Okay. Do you know how you classify critical limb ischemia?
So based on the ABPI.
Okay, that all you can tell. There is one more classification also, but if you are not aware, that's fine. You can read about it. But tell based on ABPI.
So normal ABPI is 0.9 to 1.3. More than
Mm-hmm.
1.3 indicates thickened and calcified walls.
Mm-hmm.
Less than zero point 0.9 indicates intermittent claudication.
Mm-hmm.
And less than zero point 0.5.
No, so grade 1 is what? 0.9, right?
So the grading, I don't know.
So you can gauge, no, approximately. It is usually in three grades. Say zero point 0.9 to zero point 0.6 is grade 1, zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.3 is actually grade 2, and less than zero point 0.3, as you said, 30 degrees and less is grade 3 actually. And actually the where the severest form is usually considered when even at 10 degrees, 10 to 15 degrees, patient will perceive severe pain, and there is immediate blanching or pallor of the toes, for example. So that is a critical limb ischemia. So depending on the severity, you can mention grade 1, 2, 3, and sometimes severest form or 4. Okay. So similarly, there is a Fontaine's classification, which classifies
Yes,
more or
sir.
less similarly based on ABPI index only, with add-on features, with like other changes, skin changes, etc. And you can read later on. But I mean, when you're doing good, the examiner may ask you about critical limb ischemia. How do you gauge it, and what is the importance of it? Okay, fine.
Okay.
Then next, proceed. You mentioned
On
one more
pal.
test, that is Fuchs test,
Yes, sir.
right? Okay, what is Fuchs test?
So it is used to detect popliteal pulsations in which the affected leg, the patient is asked to sit cross-legged with the affected
Mm-hmm.
leg over the normal leg, and the
Mm-hmm.
patient is distracted by talking to him. So
Mm-hmm.
with every popliteal pulse, the foot is seen to oscillate.
Okay, so here it will be present or not?
So it is present in this case.
Okay, okay, fine, fine. Okay, next,
So
proceed.
on
Palpation.
palpation, the skin of the left toe is cold and non-tender. All findings of inspection are confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
Proximal left foot is also colder than the right foot. Both
Mm-hmm.
legs have similar temperature. All
Okay.
movements and sensations at the great toe are lost.
Mm-hmm.
Ankle, knee, and hip joints have normal movements. There is no
Okay.
edema or crepitus. Ipsilateral inguinal lymph node is not enlarged.
Okay.
Dorsalis
See now
pedis
this finding of what you mentioned, no, inguinal lymph node. So on inspection also you need to mention there is no fullness in the ipsilateral inguinal region at the region of the lymph node, because if there is some infection in the foot or in the skin level, there will be presence of some enlarged inguinal lymph nodes. So no fullness on inspection, and actually tender lymph nodes if at all present, or palpable lymph nodes if at all present on the inguinal group of lymph nodes, that you check on the actual palpation which you mentioned now correctly. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Next.
Dorsalis pedis, anterior and posterior tibial pulses are not felt on the left side. Left-sided femoral and popliteal pulses are well felt. All
Mhm.
pulses on the opposite limb are well felt. Radial,
Okay.
brachial, and carotids are well felt bilaterally.
Mhm.
Or
Now
on
tell all the
auscultation,
pulses where they
so
palpate.
first, the dorsalis pedis,
Mhm.
we palpate in the proximal part of the first metatarsal web space lateral to the uh, extensor pollicis longus tendon,
Mhm.
uh, against
Again,
the
see when you
middle
mention any
cuneiform bone.
pulsations, there are always two anatomical landmarks. One is a soft tissue landmark and one is a bone. So one needs to palpate the pulse on always against the bone. against a soft tissue or against muscles or say subcutaneous fat, one may not be able to appreciate all the features of a vessel. So for appreciate all the force, volume, tension, etc. Features of this vessel wall, one needs to palpate it against a bone. So one bone and one anatomical landmark, as you mentioned about the lateral aspect of say,
Sir,
uh,
it is
yeah,
palpated against the middle cuneiform bone.
okay, okay. Now suppose the dorsal epiphysis is absent, is it normal?
Sir, it is normal in 10% of the population.
Correct. Yes. So one should be aware of this particular deviation that in up to 10% of the population it is absent, yet the person is normal because of other collaterals that are present. Okay, then anterior tibial.
So anterior tibial is palpated at the midpoint between the two malleoli anteriorly, again lateral to the extensor pollicis longus tendon,
Hmm.
against the
Against
lower
which
part
bone?
of tibia.
Lower part of tibia. Tibia will come there.
Mm,
What will
uh,
come there? Actually?
Talus.
Miss, see, you just think logically and practically what are the bones that will usually come there when you're actually palpating. You can palpate for yourself on your that same area and understand which bone usually comes there. Then next, posterior tibial.
So it is palpated midway between the medial malleolus and the insertion of the tendon Achilles
Hmm.
against the calcaneum bone.
Okay. Then next, popliteal.
So popliteal is palpated like we ask the patient to flex his knee and we place like both our hands in the popliteal fossa with
Hmm.
the thumbs at the tibial tuberosities and we try
Hmm.
to feel for the popliteal pulse.
Okay. Now here you should mention that popliteal pulsations can be palpated by two positions or in two different positions. One is when patient is in supine position and you are facing the patient, and second when patient is in the prone position. Okay. So
Yes,
you I think first mentioned in the supine position, correct? When you are facing
yes,
towards
sir.
the patient, your both thumbs are resting on the tibial tuberosity, and your both other four fingers are starting from the midline. And how you actually demonstrate it? Yes.
Uh, so like in the popliteal fossa, we put our both
Mm.
hands and the two thumbs will be at the tibial tuberosity.
Okay. And how do you palpate? Basically, you have to palpate from midline and you go laterally with both hands. Fine. So my thumb is on the tibial tuberosity. My other four fingers are behind, and my both fingers, right and left hand, are meeting in the center. And then I'm going slowly, slowly laterally on either side to appreciate the exact pulsation of the popliteal artery. Why? Because unlike saphenofemoral junction or the femoral pulsation, this is a little inconstant location of the popliteal artery. It is not exactly bang in the midline. Sometimes it can go little medially, sometimes it can go little laterally for an individual. So one has to start palpating from midline and slowly go laterally. Fine. So there is a possibility that many times you may appreciate in the exactly bang in the center opposite in the popliteal fossa, but here there is a possibility you may have to go a little bit laterally. So always start in the midline and then proceed a little bit laterally. That is in a supine position when you are facing towards the patient. Now when this is palpated against the which bone?
Uh, Tibia,
Tibia. Okay. And in prone
tibial
position,
column. Uh,
yes.
Sir, in the
In prone
prone
position.
position also, we ask the patient to flex the leg and you can
Hmm.
palpate.
Hmm. Palpate almost similarly, but here with one hand. Say for example, you are palpating with the left hand. So with the right hand, you will flex the lower limb, and with the left hand, you will go in the midline and start palpating. Okay, in a similar fashion
Yes, sir.
against the lower and the femur here, because you are going
Okay.
above palpation. This is
Okay.
popliteal. Then femoral.
So femoral is palpated at the mid-inguinal point
Hmm.
against the neck of the femur.
Neck of the femur. Okay.
Head of the femur.
Okay, head of the femur. Then see, actually, if you see technically, if you see femoral, carotid, they are not called as peripheral pulses ideally. But yes, during the description, one may mention it. That is okay. Hmm? Then you go to the radial, where we palpate
So,
radial artery.
radial is palpated with the hands in the semi-prone position.
Mhm.
It is palpated lateral to the flexor pollicis longus tendon against the
Mhm.
lower end of the radius.
Yeah. Okay. Ulnar.
So it is again it is palpated in the with the forearm in the semi-prone position,
Mhm.
medial to the flexor profunda femoris. No, uh,
No, no. Where exactly you palpate ulnar on the forearm? Is it at the wrist?
yes, sir.
So you mentioned at the wrist. No, why are you mentioning forearm? Forearm is a big area.
Yes.
So just like radial, you palpate exactly opposite side. Uh, on the other side, you palpate for the ulnar. That is on the medial aspect, right?
Okay,
Radial
sir.
is laterally, correct? So it is palpated against which bone? Ulnar artery.
Ulnar bone,
Okay,
lower end
okay,
of the ulnar.
okay. Then brachial.
So brachial is palpated above the elbow,
Mhm.
medial to the flexor of the biceps brachii against the
Mhm.
lower end of the humerus.
So in the cubital fossa, basically, and to the medial or lateral the biceps brachii tendon.
Medial,
Medial. Okay. Which bone? Against which bone?
lower end of the humerus.
Okay. Fine. Okay. Then axillary, where we palpate?
Sir, at the floor, at the upper part of the floor of the axilla,
Mhm.
against the upper part of the humerus bone.
Okay. So here it is palpated little laterally. Okay. Remember this. Okay. Then anything else you want to mention about palpation?
So carotid.
Carotid. Okay. Where do you
So
palpate carotid? Yes.
in front of the in the middle, in the front and in the middle of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, against the
Mhm.
transverse process of the C6 vertebra.
Okay. Okay. That is called as what tubercle?
Cassagnac tubercle.
Okay. Very good. Then facial.
Facial is palpated in the on the anterior border of the masseter against the ramus of the mandible. No, body of the mandible.
Okay. Okay. And lastly, temporal.
It is palpated in front of the tragus
Mhm.
against the posterior root of the zygomatic arch.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So this one, if you are everyone is very clear in this, there will not be any issues because many candidates we have seen fumbling unnecessarily actually in this very simple palpatory methods all around. So you have to just go simply palpating, and once you understand where to palpate, and you have palpated actually in the practicals or in the wards, so you will not forget. So there is nothing to actually mug only. Just try to understand where you are supposed to palpate and speak confidently. Always remember one anatomical landmark and one bone, so you will not go wrong. And where all and go methodically from say foot to head. Okay. So these are all pulsations, both peripheral and central. We have palpated. So all are normal except in this person, the dorsal is anterior and posterior tibial absent. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Then proceed. What else now?
On auscultation, there is no bruit
Mhm.
heard along the course of arteries in the legs or in the abdominal aorta and carotid.
Okay.
Diagnosis.
Yes.
My patient, Mr. Ramesh, a 35-year-old smoker with left-sided peripheral vascular disease, most
Mm-hmm.
likely an infrapopliteal block, complicated with dry gangrene of the left great toe, secondary to Berger's disease.
Okay. Very good. Now, before you go to the diagnosis, you need to also mention about the system examination, and especially two systems are important. One is a cardiovascular. This is directly related, and second is respiratory. Fine.
Okay, sir.
So you have to mention. Don't forget. Quickly, you need to mention system examination. CNS and per abdomen. If you don't mention, it is still okay. The per abdomen also should mention, but that's okay. But CVS, yes, you cannot escape it. Fine. So CVS was normal.
Yes, S1, S2 heard no murmur.
Okay, fine, fine. Yeah. So now, how will you manage a patient?
Sir, I would like to do investigations.
Hmm.
Sir, on biochemical investigations, I would like to do a CBC, in which I would
Hmm.
look for the WBC count to rule out any superadded infection.
Okay.
Then to rule out atherosclerosis and its risk factors like diabetes
Hmm.
and cholesterol. I would like to do blood sugar, urine routine, and a lipid profile. I would like to do
Correct.
a VDRA test to rule out syphilis.
Hmm.
And then, so coming to the radiological investigations,
Hmm.
uh, I'd like to do an X-ray of the lower limb to look for any osteomyelitic changes. I'd like to
Okay.
do an abdominal X-ray to look for calcifications of atherosclerosis in the abdominal aorta.
Hmm.
So I'd like to do a USG Doppler or a duplex scan, which will
Okay.
tell me about the affected area, the flow, and the turbulence in the vessel.
Hmm.
CT angiogram is the investigation of choice.
Hmm.
Sir, I can also do a digital subtraction percutaneous angiography to look
Hmm.
for the number of blockages, the site, the flow, the distal runoff, and it would show a corkscrew appearance in Buerger's disease due to the dilated vasa vasorum.
Okay. Very good. Now tell me a little bit more about Doppler study. What is it is
Uh,
based on what principle and how do we do it? And what are the
uh,
different types of Doppler? Do you know?
so Doppler is a non-invasive investigation. It is based on the principle of Doppler shift. When in
Hmm.
the flowing blood, the sound waves are reflected, ultrasonic sound waves are reflected from the probe, and there is a receiver in the probe. So, based on the flow in the vessel, which is based on the principle of Doppler shift, we can detect the flow in the vessel. The normal flow in arteries is a triphasic flow.
No, no. So what do we pick up on Doppler? It's just a flow or what happens? How do you do it? If you have seen a Doppler, you understand. There's a probe, right?
Hmm.
So on a vessel, you keep a probe and you pass on ultrasonic waves, correct? And there are waves that are going inside, and there are waves that are returning back to the probe. Okay, so there is some change in the frequency of incoming, uh, that is frequency, and frequency that you are putting, that is outgoing. So this change in the frequency is noted, and based on that you can then calculate that whether patient is having what type of problem. So what we say, when we do for say veins, we say arterialization of the vein, right? So there is a reversal of flow. So we then term it as incompetent vein, for example. Here, basically, we need to look for a blood supply. So what we're looking here is the passage, whether it is going normally or not. See, usually for arteries, it is away from the heart always, while in vein, it is towards the heart. So if there is any reversal of flow or any change in the flow, you will come to know immediately. And accordingly, the color coding is done. This is again mainly important in uh, context with the varicose veins case, but that is called duplex scanning. So this color Doppler actually, so that we do. But here again, what is important is one can detect the level of basically the exact level of block. Fine. Second thing, what we do, what we check actually is the extent of the block. How long is the block? Okay. So for example, 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter, 5 centimeter, that thing. Third thing we see distal runoff, how patent it is. Fourth thing what we see is presence of collaterals as such. Okay. So and then late in the entire system when we actually try to see, we can pick up even multiple blocks if at all as such. So all these findings are possible when we are doing a Doppler study. So this is a simple, non-invasive, and relatively not so expensive. Even if you do a simple handheld Doppler. So what are the different types of Doppler? Do you know? Yes, Riddhi.
Uh, so I don't know.
See, the basic most Doppler is a handheld Doppler, correct? Okay. So it is just tells you or what we call as a simple audio Doppler. So what you hear is the voice to the headphone as such. So it gives the sound waves. Okay. The second type of Doppler is the spectral Doppler. Spectral Doppler is like an ECG. A graph is plotted on a charting paper, and the waveform usually comes as such. That is the second type. That is spectral Doppler. The third type Doppler is a simple color Doppler, so where we do a color coding to it. So red for artery, blue for vein. Then you use additional ultrasound, so called as a duplex Doppler. Okay. Then lastly is the power Doppler. So power Doppler is basically we use the micro bubbles actually sometimes at a level where we are having say a group of vessels, and then we create a picture and have the interface clearance with that. So with that, that's a power Doppler is used for specific speaking of say hemangiomas, for example, or say other uncommon vascular conditions. But usually the color Doppler, the duplex Doppler are the commonest Dopplers that we use. So even handheld Doppler are also important. Important is the probe. So we have usually two probes. One is a 4 megahertz probe and one is a 8 megahertz probe. Okay. So usually the 4 megahertz probe is usually used for a little smaller vessels, and 8 megahertz probe is usually used for some larger vessels. So both we can actually use and you can pick up. And even based on that, you can actually detect the means various pathologies in the arterial system. So Doppler gives you a lot of information. Okay. Next to mention about the CT angio. Now CT angio has a role, but then you have to use it judiciously because it is a costly investigation. One thing, and second thing, it is not available everywhere as such. So suppose tomorrow you are at say other small city practicing, there may not be a possibility that immediately you will have the CT angio. But Doppler, yes, you can keep it with yourself also. A simple small bag and a handheld Doppler. So that will give you quick information. But CT angio is reserved for some specific indications as such. Then you mentioned about the DSA, correct? Now DSA is an invasive procedure actually, as if you are aware. So it requires actually a big setup and a big machine like a cat. I mean, and of course setup like a cath lab actually. So transfemoral route is usually adopted, and the guide wire is passed, and then accordingly the picture is taken, and we digitally subtract from the picture which is taken earlier. So only the vessels now remain. There is a digital subtraction angiography. It's a very good technique. It gives you a beautiful picture, but it also carries morbidity and up to 1 to 2% mortality. So you have to be extremely careful when you are subjecting patient to digital subtraction angiography. Again, it has very limited indications. So not every patient you can subject for DAC. Fine. Okay. Now you mentioned about the Berger disease. So can you please tell me something about Berger disease? What it is? What are the components of Berger disease?
Berger's disease affects all three: arteries, veins, and nerves. Arterial involvement is usually a panarteritis. Veins can be involved as a superficial thrombophlebitis, and nerves are involved, which cause the rest pain.
What else?
So it can present as intermittent claudication.
When you no, that's okay. When you mention about Berger's, three things immediately should come. Is it also called as TAO?
Thromboangiitis obliterative. Yeah.
Correct? Huh. So
Yes.
what are the three important parameters of this Berger disease? First parameter or first criteria, usually males are affected more. Okay. Second thing, it is a disease of small, medium
smokers,
size and smokers. Okay, so these three parameters you should mention when an examiner asks you what do you know by Berger disease, and then you can mention the internal issues such as the panarteritis or even involvement of the associated vein and nerve. That is okay, but these three parameters are very crucial for labeling a particular vascular entity as a Berger disease. Okay, so if the patient does say cessation of smoking and there is a change in habit, there is a possibility of some reversal if it is in an earlier stage. Okay. Okay. Now, what is Raynaud's phenomena?
So Raynaud's phenomena, it is usually seen in the upper limb, wherein in exposure to cold, the fingers undergo a sequential change of blanching, uh, cyanosis, and flushing. It is seen in case of Raynaud's disease, in Berger's disease, and in connective tissue diseases like SLE and rheumatoid arthritis.
Okay. Now, what is the main difference between the Raynaud's phenomena and Raynaud's disease?
Sir, Raynaud phenomenon can be seen in other diseases as well.
Like,
Raynaud's disease is like if the Raynaud's phenomena is secondary to other pathologies, it is usually more painful, and if it is a primary Raynaud's disease, it is seen to be less painful.
primary and secondary. Okay. 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 Fine. So, what treatment will you offer to your patient now? You know the problem. Okay.
So first of all, I would advise him to stop smoking and to
Correct.
take care of his feet.
Hmm.
Then I would ask him, I would tell him about Berger's position and the Berger's exercise. I would
Okay.
give him a few drugs like aspirin and vasodilators like
Okay.
nifedipine.
Can you tell about the Burgess exercise? How you will guide him, or how will you educate him rather?
Uh, so the patient is asked to lie in the supine position, and he's asked to elevate his leg without bending at the knee joint for 2 minutes, and
Hmm.
then keep it flat again for 2 minutes. This has to be done repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then what else he has to do? Any exercise? He said. Means how will you increase the blood supply? That's what I'm asking.
Sir, he's
One
asked
is
to
one
do
you mentioned about
exercise.
the position. That's true. What else?
Sir, he's asked to do exercises up to the point of claudication so that the collaterals will develop.
Okay. So how? What exercise exactly?
Uh, so walking.
No. When you are doing Burgers as such, so what patient is lying down or say doing whatever limb elevation as such. So what he is supposed to do? Besides that, you can tell them to do a cycling in the air. Okay, and cycling exercise also increases the blood supply. So these are the Burgers exercises actually. Okay, so there you can do and you can enhance the circulation as such. Then you mentioned about some medicines. Yeah. So which medicines will you give?
Sir, aspirin,
Okay.
nifedipine, cilostazol, clopidogrel, and analgesics for pain relief.
Okay. Aspirin, what dose usually?
75 mg OD.
Okay. So usually a low dose aspirin is important, 75 milligram. Okay. Now see, if you're giving aspirin, actually there is no need to give even the clopidogrel. Ideally, there are specific indication when you need to combine and give. So otherwise you can just start with this. And second thing you mentioned about some certain vasodilators. So which vasodilators will you use?
Sir, nifedipine.
Okay. What is
Sir,
what is Trental and what is
pentoxyphylline.
Complamina? Trental
Sorry,
and
sir.
Complamina. What is Trental and Complamina? These are the brand names, of course, but what it contains.
I don't know, sir.
Trental is pentoxyphylline, no?
Okay.
And Complamina is xanthine nicotinate. So these basically you use commonly uh, for the patients. So to enhance the microcirculation. Important is there should be a combination of exercise and microcirculation drug improvement. So both should be there to have overall enhancement in the patient circulation as such. Of course, it depends on the patient's individual capacity, how he or she will take it, but usually it gives a good result. Okay. Next, what will you do? Patient already
Uh,
has a gangrene, you said.
Yes, sir.
So
Sir, I
what
would
will you
like
do?
to do one amputation.
Okay. Why?
Uh, Sir, or I would like to, if it is indicated only, I would like to do an amputation. Otherwise, I would wait for it to auto amputate. Meanwhile, I
Okay.
would monitor for any signs of superadded infection.
Okay. Okay. So usually dry gangrene we do not touch usually unless there is some additional infection zone prior to it. We try to convert it also into a dry one. Okay. And we allow it to fall on its own. As you said correctly, a process of auto amputation. Correct. Okay. Now what is gangrene? Can you define gangrene?
So gangrene is a macroscopic death of tissues with or without superadded putrefaction.
Without or with?
With
Why did you say without separated infection?
so actually, I thought that in dry gangrene maybe there is no putrefaction.
No, that is different. That is later on. Dry or wet is a later on issue. What is gangrene is a that you meant to mention. Okay. So now, how do you classify dry and wet?
So dry gangrene has a blackened, shriveled, and mummified appearance. Wet gangrene would be edematous, and there would be skip lesions seen in a wet gangrene. Wet gangrene is seen to spread more faster than a dry gangrene. And in dry gangrene, there is a definite line of demarcation which is absent in the wet gangrene.
Mm-hmm.
So, treatment
Okay.
wise, we can wait for the dry gangrene to auto amputate,
Mm.
whereas for the wet gangrene, we would have to go for an amputation.
No. See, the correct answer should be your aim should be to convert a wet gangrene into a dry gangrene. So reduce the edema, decrease the infection, and allow it to heal. Okay. Or see, amputation is not a solution for everything. So what we want to do is try to salvage. So the aim or answer should be try to convert a wet gangrene into a dry gangrene, and then you take a call whether you want to amputate or let it fall after consulting or counseling rather with the patient that what is best for that particular individual. But the answer should be try to convert the wet into a dry gangrene. Now there is a line of demarcation, correct? So what do you understand by this line of demarcation? What it
So,
signifies?
line of demarcation separates the viable from the non-viable tissue. It indicates that the disease is getting localized.
Okay, and why it gets formed? What is the pathophysiology?
So there is a layer of granulation tissue which will eventually form between the viable and the non-viable tissue. Meanwhile,
Mhm,
there is erythema at the line of demarcation, and there can be
mhm.
hyperesthesia
Okay.
due to the
So this
exposed
basically
nerve end.
happens at one plane all around in that particular individual. That is
Hmm.
why there is a clear-cut line of demarcation. It doesn't happen like in skin, it happening at subcut at different level, at the muscle level at different and here. So it is not a zigzag thing. It is at one line. So that is a typical thing. The rate of destruction is same in all planes. That is happening here. That is why there is a clear-cut line of demarcation, and that is why it can just fall off or auto amputation can happen. Okay. Okay. Uh, fine, fine. What else would you like to do for the patient later on? Suppose it undergoes auto amputation. What is next?
Sir, I would like to rehabilitate the patient.
Hmm. How?
So there can be physical, mental, and social rehabilitation. So physically, I would give him pain relief, antibiotics,
Hmm.
uh, and any prosthesis if it is possible.
Okay.
In mental rehabilitation, I would like to counsel the patient before and after the amputation.
Yes,
And in
that is most
social
important.
rehab, sorry,
See,
sir.
mental rehabilitation is extremely important than actually the physical rehabilitation because patient needs to accept that he or she is undergoing some amputation process and he or she is going to lose the part permanently. So that once patient accepts the fact, it becomes quite easy for the surgeon to operate and then get the best results. Otherwise, patient is in a mode of denial or in a state of denial, then it becomes very difficult. Even if you do a perfect job, usually end results are very not so promising. So that is why it is important that counseling, which is usually given not that much weightage by anyone, because there is no time to talk to patient and patient relatives so much. But then if it is not possible for you, then you appoint a counselor at least, a person who will talk, because relatives are anxious. Patient is on the top, extremely anxious what is happening because he is losing a body part. So one has to talk to the patient. There is no substitute for it. And if the surgeon talks, it gives the best results. So, treating surgeon or treating or operating surgeon. However, sometimes because of some other say unforeseen circumstances, it is not possible. You need to try to arrange a good counselor who will speak emphatically, totally, empathetically to the patient, and then support and encourage patient that don't worry, everything will be fine, and he will be okay post procedure, not to worry, and he will be rehabilitated. That assurance is extremely important for the patient and for you as a treating surgeon to have excellent outcomes. So mental rehabilitation, most important factor, it is extremely underrated. Second is, as you said correctly, physical rehabilitation, and third is the social rehabilitation, where you can actually show him pathways or avenues where he can actually go for it as such, and try to have some financial support later on as such. All right. Okay. So good actually. So it's a good presentation and it's a straightforward case of peripheral arterial disease. Important is try to involve all the points in the history. Then on examination, try to again examine everything that you have mentioned clearly in the history. And then of course the examination part locally. You have to do it perfectly, both in standing position, in supine position. And there are a few tests and other things that one need to mention. Okay. Now, okay. Now, what is pregangrene?
So pregangrene is a set of signs and symptoms which tells us that the limb supply, that the blood supply to the limb is not adequate. It includes rest pain, edema, and color changes in the part.
Okay. Rest pain, edema, color changes. Okay. Anything else? There are actually reduced sensations also. Little bit less sensations also for the patient. Okay, that is pre-gangrene. Then you have mentioned, of course, the gangrene diagram. What is a dieback phenomena?
I'm not sure, sir.
See, you have seen the skip lesions, no? Skip lesions. So what happens? Dieback phenomena is basically nothing but at some distant location, suddenly a black patch develops. This is characteristically seen in wet gangrene, as we have discussed earlier. So at some point, suddenly a small embolus goes and gets lodged, and that initiates the skin gangrene and eventually maybe full thickness gangrene. So one need to be very careful and need to understand why it is happening and how you will pick up. So this dieback phenomena, one has to be very aware. That's why one need to treat the wet gangrene very aggressively. So in order to make it completely dry, so it will help. Now, what are the characteristic signs of embolization?
So there is pallor, pulselessness, paresthesia, poikilothermia, pain, and
there are basically 5 P's one need to remember for embolus. Okay. So once you know that thing, it is easier. Fine. What is Ehlers syndrome?
so it is seen with a block at the aortoiliac level. There is claudication, pain in the buttocks, thighs, and hips region with impotence.
Okay. Okay. And what is hemilerische?
I don't know, sir.
So, see the word it says, no, it is only on one side. So one side is basically more affected, and this is not like a actually reverse Y shaped. Larycia is like a reverse Y shape, for example. The hemilarycia is just half part. So here all the signs or symptoms are rather less pronounced. That is the main thing sometimes. So okay, fine. Okay, then clinically, now I will just go little beyond certain things. Uh, how will you pick up aneurysm clinically?
So it is picked up as a swelling, which is pulsatile.
Mhm.
Uh, it will not move with respiration.
Certainly,
Uh,
right. What else will happen? So
so
usually patient will
there
have
can be pain
some,
if it is a large.
okay, pain will be there, possibly, yes, pain will be there. Then there will be pulsatile swelling, that is a possibility. Or you can appreciate, say, swelling in the chest region or in the epigastrium or in the region of manubrium sternum. Okay, because it will slowly erode the bone. But how will you pick up suddenly by just observing the patient without asking anything or without saying?
I'm not sure, sir.
Okay. Usually what happens, patient will oscillate. Okay. Patient will not sit idle in a sitting position. See, when you are sitting healthy idle, that is normal. So when the excess burden is there of this aneurysm and excess of blood that is going, there are large aneurysm, whether it is true or pseudo, different thing. But when it is going, so usually patient usually oscillates. So to and fro movements will be seen when the patient is sitting. Okay, like with each stroke, each time the heart pumps the blood, it will patient will oscillate. So we just see the simple observation. Suppose you enter in a room and you see patient involuntarily oscillating, not voluntarily. Remember, it is the involuntary oscillation. Patient is not aware. If you ask patient why you are oscillating, there is a possibility patient may momentarily can halt it or stop it. But if you just uh, drags his attention somewhere else, he again will start oscillating. So this is the involuntary or oscillatory movement of the patient in a sitting position, characteristic for aneurysm. And if patient by chance has aneurysm, then you need to be extremely careful and need to investigate further, because depending on type of aneurysm, whether it is true aneurysm or pseudo aneurysm, the other factors will matter. So what will happen? What is the difference between true and
Sir,
pseudo?
true aneurysm will involve all the layers of the arterial wall, whereas a pseudo aneurysm will only involve the muscularis and the adventitia.
Mhm. Okay, what is dissecting aneurysm?
Sorry, sir.
Dissecting aneurysm.
Aortic dissection. It is a tear in the intima due to which blood will accumulate between the intima and the muscular layer.
Okay, okay. Now, what are the natural outcomes of aneurysm?
So, if it is a small one, the patient can be asymptomatic. There may be, if it is a large one, there may be rupture. Uh, there can be thrombus formation, which can embolize.
Okay, fine, fine. So rupture is again a catastrophe, and one needs to be very well aware and ready for this surgical emergency, because it usually is a fatal one. Even if you intervene timely, because of the massive blood loss and a major vessel tear, usually patient succumbs. But if you are in the best of the center with a good team, there is a possibility that you may save the individual. But yes, it requires a lot of expertise and good team efforts. But yes, if the aneurysm ruptures, usually around 66% of the patients die instantaneously, statistically. The remaining 33% who survive, out of which 50% will develop aneurysm later on. Again, some different type. And out of this 50%, again 33% will die by the end of 1 to 2 years. So it is that devastating if at all person develops abdominal aortic aneurysm. Now, what is mycotic aneurysm?
So it is caused due to infection, most commonly by Staphylococcus aureus.
Okay. Okay. And what is syphilitic aneurysm?
I'm not sure, sir.
See, it happens because of the syphilis, right? Vasculopathy happens. Understand? So, because of the syphilis, similar picture is observed in this, and patient will develop not a true but a part of a pseudoaneurysm, not a true aneurysm as such, syphilitic aneurysm. Need to treat the primary, it will get cured. That is the important message actually. Once you know the primary, you can cure it. If it is just a mechanical one, then you have to treat the underlying pathology and then accordingly treat. Now, suppose again coming back to peripheral artery disease, lastly, suppose there is a large thrombus present. So, how will you treat a thrombus?
Sir, if there is an acute blockage, then I would like to go for thrombolysis or an embolectomy.
Yes.
But then if it is a chronic, like in an atherosclerotic disease, then I can go for percutaneous angioplasty with stenting or a bypass graft. Or if it is in the aortoiliac femoral region, I can try an endarterectomy.
Okay. Now, can you tell me a little bit about thrombolysis therapy?
So thrombolysis is usually performed with TPA, and it is most effective if it is given within 24 hours of the onset.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Initially, what we used to start with patient. Now, this TP has come later on. Earlier, what options we had?
Streptokinase.
Urokinase and streptokinase. Okay. Yeah. Earlier, we used to start the drip. Okay. And now we have started with the tissue plasminogen activators. Okay. So a spray form is usually used. It acts quite fast and gives best results for thrombolysis. So thrombolysis therapy is used. Now suppose as you mentioned, the patient is atherosclerotic. So you have to start patient on statins. Okay. So these patients will benefit from the statin, and plus a patient is hypertensive. And also you have to
Hypertension,
treat
diabetes.
a patient accordingly. Yeah. Now sometimes there is a disease which you are treating but not getting enough uh, desired effects as such. Okay. So then you have to do a surgery. Okay. So surgery, which surgery will you offer?
Sir, a bypass graft.
A bypass graft you can put. Okay. What is profundoplasty?
Sir, it is used to improve the blood flow around in the profunda femoris region.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Now, one last question. How will you prevent the occurrence of recurrent emboli or say recurrent thrombus getting lodged somewhere else in the body?
So we can, like, first of all, medically, we would give anticoagulants like aspirin, clopidogrel, or low
Mm-hmm.
molecular weight heparin. And
Okay.
surgically, we can put an IVC filter, green field filter.
Yeah, correct. Excellent. Excellent. Good. Very good. So, any more questions now?
Sir, I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, regarding the
Yes.
oscillatory thing that you said for pulsations, I didn't
Uh,
understand
uh,
how do we look for it? Like we have a habit of.
no, 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 no. See what happens sometimes if you're aware now, many of your colleagues or many of the people in your surrounding, they are very anxious and they continuously oscillate. That is not what we are talking about. Okay, that is a voluntary oscillation because they're thinking and they're continuously anxious and say slightly irritable. So they are not stable, sitting stably. That is one thing. That is not what we're discussing. What we are discussing here, when you are say you are coming to OPD, patient is sitting on examination table, for example, and patient is thinking in something own. Means he is not fully attentive to the thing and he's just oscillating. very slowly. So it is not obvious big oscillations like a patient anxious who is just tapping his hands, legs as such. What you are thinking in your mind, correct? It is different thing. Here, the patient is involuntarily oscillating because of the pathology which he is harboring inside. There is a big aneurysm, a big flow is getting diverted not into the normal stream but into some added stream, and because of additional burden, there is a continuous pull and push, and that is happening in that particular region. And because of that push thrust continuously, he slightly oscillates. Okay, so anterior posteriorly slight oscillations are observed involuntarily. Now, when you talk to that particular individual, if you are with your very fine eyes, you can still pick up that thing. But if you ask why you are oscillating, for example, in momentary he will try to stop it, but it is not possible sometimes for him to stop completely. But again, you deviate his mind to some other talk, other some discussion. Again, he will start oscillating involuntarily. That is what I mean. It is not very big, obvious oscillation like some persons or some individuals do it when they're extremely anxious, nervous. Say for example, sometimes you are irritated or you are very anxious that now whether I know the answer or not, and you are anxiously oscillating. That is a different oscillation. So this is what we are talking mainly for a pathological oscillation. Fine.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? See,
Sir,
this is
I
a
had a doubt.
yes, yes, yes.
So,
Yeah.
with reference to the amputation, so if
Mm-hmm.
the great toe is involved
Mm-hmm.
and we have to amputate, then we would go for a ray amputation. But if the disease is more extending proximally, like say half of the foot is involved, then sir, would we go for a below the knee amputation or an ankle amputation in a peripheral
See,
vascular disease?
see, for this, what is important is two things you need to follow. Whether means how much you can salvage. That is one thing. Okay, one thing most important. That will be depending on the exact Doppler study finding. Till what level the blockage is there, and below what level is the cutoff, and is there a possibility of having any salvage procedure. If that is not possible, then you do the amputation. That is one thing. Now, as you said correctly, you have to decide the level of amputation. To decide the level of amputation, one has to go one actually pulsations above. So usually TBLs are not palpable, but popliteal are palpable. And yes, whatever stump that you are creating, that at least should be viable and supple. Because if that stump is not going to remain viable and vascular, then again it is going to have gangrene or sort of artificial gangrene that is you are giving, because the blood supply you are not ensured properly. So one level up you have to go, one joint above. So if ankle is affected, you have to check at a knee joint and check whether the blood supply is adequate all around. Then you can decide for you have to go for a low below knee amputation. Now below knee amputation can be again a low below knee amputation, or you can go for a above knee amputation. Now depending on the vasculature, suppose you are not very sure, then you can do for a guillotine one. So a two-stage amputation one can do. First you do a guillotine amputation. Observe the patient for a week or so. If you see all red, good granulation tissue and good vasculature, then you can go for a revision amputation, and then with a long posterior flap, one can actually close the stump and achieve a good amputation stump as such. But sometimes if you have meticulously planned procedure at the first or in single stage only, one can go for a complete closure of the amputation stump. That depends on how planned amputation you are doing. So if you are doing on emergency basis, better to go for a guillotine, and then you go for the revision one at maybe a 1 month or 3 weeks. And whether you want to, important is, see, whatever amputation you do, you should be able to rehabilitate the patient. So either with a Jaipur foot or with some other processes that should be there. If that is not available, you do it in such a way that you should be able to then later on make patient self-sustained. That is what is important. Hmm? Yes. So this is a relatively straightforward case with good discussion compared to the vasculature. I have asked few added questions, of course, that may not be asked at MBBS level, but for making you preparation. Basically, the abdominal aortic aneurysm. Now there are other things, other arthritis and other things also mentioned there, but that much depth I'm not going here. That is not required at MBBS level. Maybe at MS level it is required, but you have answered quite well. I'm happy, Riddhi. Now, only thing is that you have to speak little more confidently in the exam. The rest is absolutely fine. You have presented all the points and included all the points. Any more questions? Okay. Now, just quickly, the last of the peripheral arterial disease. What are the recent advances, Riddhi? Tell me.
So with
To,
reference to
to
therapy,
improvise, yeah, to improvise the local vasculature. Suppose that particular limb is having less blood supply. You have given patient medicines. It is not improving, unfortunately. Now, patient is again not in that condition that you have to will go for a stent or something. So, what other corrective measures have been offered to improvise the local circulation? Recent
sir,
advances.
I only know of the medical therapy. So
Hmm.
there are VGF agonists,
Yes,
which
yes,
will help the endothelium proliferate and help in
correct.
angiogenesis to improve the blood flow.
Yes,
Then
correct.
there is cilostazol, which is a
Hmm.
phosphodiesterase 3 inhibitor. So
Yes,
even that can help increase the blood flow in the area.
very good. Any other options? Anyone aware of? What is omentoplasty? We put omentum. Okay. Omental plug therapy is given or omentoplasty is done at the level. Now omentum has ability to have new capillary generation. Okay, and it will try to generate new vessel formation in the vicinity. So sometimes omental plug therapy is given. So this omental use can be done. Second thing, if you have heard, there is the Elizarov technique in orthopedics. Okay,
Yes, sir.
yeah. So this Elizarov technique, which is devised by a Russian orthopedic surgeon, Gavril Elizarov. So he has, of course, it is used for orthopedic that you are aware. I'm not going into that detail. Its implication for improving the local circulation is a clear cut. Osteotomy is done, and the braces are put all around the particular shaft, and it is separated, and it promotes the vasculature from below and up. So that is Elizarov technique is used. And lastly is a gene therapy. Okay. So in gene therapy, one point you have mentioned that is vascular endothelial growth factors that we use. Okay. So this gene therapy that you need to mention. So if one asks about the latest in the peripheral disease that you may mention about it, plus various new, like you mentioned, cilostazol or other latest medicinal treatments that are of lot of value because people try to avoid many major surgical procedures here because the vasculature is little dicey. But again, the most important point here is the omission of the smoking. Smoking cessation actually can reverse the picture in many of the individual patients. That will give you a good outcome. Okay. Any more questions?